In this video, we're going to talk about recent rate cuts in the rideshare market, as well as a 25-hour strike from drivers in response to these cuts. So I took some time to really think about the recent driver strikes in Southern California, mainly up in Los Angeles, even here in San Diego, as well as other markets. This is in response to a rate cut from Uber. Now, Lyft did mention they did cut rates for miles in certain markets. They didn't distinguish exactly which markets when asked, but they did state that they did not change rates in Los Angeles, at least for now. Now, Uber, on the other hand, they cut rates per mile from 80 cents per mile down to 60 cents per mile. Now, if you don't know, the lowest rates that we've seen per mile for rideshare was with Uber, and that was in 2017, 30 cents per mile. 30 cents per mile was the payout. That was in Detroit, Michigan. Now, those rates went up. They've ebbed and flowed, as you may know if you're a rideshare driver. So let's talk about the good of this strike and the bad of this strike and a little bit of strategy if you're a rideshare driver. I want to give you guys full transparency. I do not drive rideshare anymore. Not at the current rates. It's not something I want to do with my vehicle given the current rates. And when I first started in late 2015 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, rates were $1.20 per mile. And you guys that are longtime drivers, if you've been driving since 2015 or earlier, you know that the marketplace for rideshare is drastically changed from then until now. Tons more drivers on the road. The surge algorithm, as far as the surge or even the prime time on Lyft, is night and day from 2015, 2014, until of course 2018 and 2019. So this was a 25% rate cut as stated by Uber. Now, there have been reports, there's evidence that this rate cut actually is a net about 10% rate cut, not so much 25, but really closer to 10% of a rate cut. So again, let's talk about some of the positives from the strike first. As someone who's been in this space for years, remember, this is still a brand new economy. Really within the last 7 years, that's really nothing, building an entire industry, and closer to the last 5 years when rideshare has really picked up steam. Let's talk about these protests. And if you remember years past, there's been other protests. Now, here's one positive about the recent protest last week from drivers. Number one, it keeps the issue in the ear of these rideshare companies. Continued protests from drivers and continued feedback to these rideshare companies at least let these companies know that the issue is not going away. That even current drivers as well as veteran drivers, they understand that these rate cuts aren't fair to them. It's eating into your own wallet. It's eating into your own income. And if you do this full time, especially, if you're a full-time driver, your expenses are staying the same. So you need to keep the issue on the top of the table. You need to keep these issues in the mind of these rideshare companies. At least you're letting them know, hey, this isn't going away. This is still a problem. Another positive that these protests bring is that it does continue attention as well with the media, the public, and other drivers. Think about the media. Now, they're seeing that, hey, this also isn't going away. Like the rideshare companies we just mentioned, the problems aren't going away. We have another protest. Or 6 months or a year later, we have another protest. And they start saying, hey, is this gig economy thing, is this rideshare thing, is it fair to everybody? Now, the audience, the public, passengers, like taking cheap rides. But when you're cutting into the other end of that equation, drivers, people that are trying to make a living driving passengers like you and I'm sure you use Uber or Lyft as well on the passenger end, that's where it becomes an issue. And that's when, again, the microscope comes in from these media companies that says, hey, they're doing another protest. This is obviously still a real issue. Nextly, the public. In a similar kind of vein, it's the passengers that take these ride-sharing platforms. They may take it every day. They may take it every week or at least here and there, and they think everything's fine. But then they start hearing the rumblings. They, again, start seeing things in the media, or if they're in one of these marketplaces, they can physically see these protests happening if they happen to drive by. So one of the positives is that it gets attention from the media, the public, and other drivers. Other drivers that may not necessarily know about all these issues. One of the common threads that you'll see in articles talking about this recent protest is that drivers, veteran drivers, are saying, hey, we're trying to get this attention, we're trying to bring this issue not only to the rideshare companies, but to current drivers, because they don't know. They could be getting taken advantage of, in their eyes, they're getting taken advantage of from these ride-sharing companies. Because new drivers, you sign up, you're ready to go, you're ready to start your side hustle, and you're ready to get in the gig economy, make a few bucks, and you're only used to the rates as they are. You're only used to the app as it is, its algorithms, the surge, prime time, whatever it is, or the upfront surge and prime time. That's the Uber and Lyft that you know. You don't know of the Uber and Lyft of yesteryear. So some of these drivers are saying, hey, you new drivers, we want to help you out too. We want to help everyone out. And this rate cut, this may be the first rate cut that you've experienced as a driver. It's been a continued issue. And some drivers have been driving like 2013, 2014, and these companies continue to cut the bottom line. So we've talked about all the attention that it brings to multiple outlets, the media, the public, the ride-sharing companies. Let's talk about some of the negatives from these protests. I need to tell it as it is, in my opinion. Now, I've seen multiple protests. I've seen on driver forums talking about protesting, talking about not driving for an entire day, or drivers saying, hey, let's do 0 pickups at the airport, no one pick up at the airport. I've seen all these conversations over the years. And again, we've seen multiple protests. Unfortunately, it's been shown that, in my opinion, these have little long-term effect. I know this point's going to bring criticism, but I want to open a dialogue, and I want to show you from what I've seen over the years, the pattern that I've seen in this ride-sharing space with drivers versus these ride-share companies. To give you an example, driving in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when I first started at the end of 2015, that was great. The couple of months I did it, I went into 2016. 2016 was fantastic. I was making really good money. January 1st, 2017, that's when I experienced my first rate cut with Uber. There was actually several in 2017. There was actually one rate increase as Uber tried to redirect the ship and kind of correct their rate cut, as a lot of drivers weren't going online. So here's the pattern that I've seen. From 2017 into 2018 and now 2019, as these rate cuts continue to happen across different markets, it can be a decrease on your per mile rate, your per minute rate, or maybe even incentives, bonuses, surge, whatever it is. Things that make the driver unhappy is I've seen all of that happen. Drivers get upset. They go to Facebook, they go to socials, all the driver forums, and they voice their opinion, which is great. And sometimes it bubbles over into a protest, right? A strike to not drive, to not go online for Uber and or Lyft. So what happens is there's usually a day strike where, in my opinion, a small percent of drivers in that market don't drive. Now, on the other side of the coin, what the rideshare companies do is they'll create surge. They'll create surge, primetime, earnings incentives. Actually, you can see a screenshot here. As the protest was going on up in Los Angeles, and some of that also trickling down here to San Diego, we can see some surge on the map, some earnings incentives to go online. Now, if we look at Lyft at the same time, who isn't in nearly as hot of water, and they're actually just announced an IPO, there's quite a different energy over in the Lyft camp, we see nothing on the driver app. So a time of the day that's in the middle of the afternoon where typically not too much is going on, this is what happens. If drivers are logging off, then the rideshare companies encourage other drivers to go online. Here's the problem with that, is if you're a driver that just, again, if you're new, if you don't know about these rate cuts, you see the surge, you see the earnings incentives, you go online. That's the pattern that I typically see, is unrest, upset drivers, communication, ultimately organization, and a strike, typically a one-day strike where drivers will log off and or agree not to do pickups in a certain zone area like the airport. What happens after that, however? The media runs their articles, right? Uber will try to respond and maybe create surge or earnings incentives, like we discussed. What happens after that? That's where the cycle really just keeps going and going. It's the unrest, it's a strike, it's media response, it's Uber's response to try to get drivers on the road. But then what after that? So let's talk about strategies, maybe how to actually enact change and your strategy as a driver, knowing everything that you know now. In my opinion, and from my experience in this ride sharing and gig economy platform, I do not think that these companies are going to increase rates for drivers, at least voluntarily. If there's some kind of regulation or they are forced to increase prices, increase earnings potential for drivers, only then will they do so. Now, let's also remember, these companies are a business. They need to make money. Lyft just went live with an IPO. They're now a public company. They need to make money. So if they're losing money, and these companies they're losing money year over year, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, they may also increase rates because of that. I do not feel that driver strikes, at least single day strikes, one day, 24-hour strikes of not going online or not picking up at the airport, I do not think they're effective. And remember, how many drivers can you reach across socials, across driver forums? How many can you really organize on that day that actually will agree, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck from these ride-sharing gigs? How many can you get to actually agree to not go online? Think about when Uber first launched, at least the first couple of years. They labeled the business as a full-time job opportunity, and even got in trouble for advertising that certain drivers were making six figures. And some of their advertisements to sign up to be a driver were touting very, very good earnings. And that quickly tapered off. So much so that Uber actually advertised their app as the ultimate side hustle, completely changing the verbiage of when they first went to market as a full-time job to now the ultimate side hustle. So I want to encourage you as a possible ride-sharing driver is to remember a few things. This industry, the gig economy, is brand new. Please do not assume that these companies are going to agree that this job is a full-time job. They may be happy with low rates, having more drivers that are driving part-time versus less drivers that are driving full-time, because as it's been said years ago from former CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, their goal is to have a driver on every street corner. If you keep other opportunities open, if you are looking at getting a full-time job, your standard W-2 full-time job, salaried hourly job, if you want to look at other gig economy, other 1099 independent contractor opportunities, I would do both. Remember, about half of rideshare drivers are working a full-time job as well as ride sharing. So remember that even if you captured 50% of those drivers that are driving for rideshare full-time, there's about half of that driver pool that they don't need to worry about full-time income because they are working that W-2, the full-time job already. So what I want you to do in the comments section is to not only let us know what platforms are working for you now, if you've moved away from rideshare, if you're looking at other 1099 opportunities, if you went for that W-2 and you're working the full-time job, supplementing with the gig economy, let us know down in the comments, but also let everyone know ideas of how to improve these apps. And it doesn't even have to be rideshare, but for the purpose of this video, let's put in ideas of how to improve Uber and Lyft. What other ways can drivers improve these apps other than the strikes and the protests? Because we've seen how much progress Frankly, we've seen how much progress the strike does. In my opinion, it's minimal. In the long term, it's been years since we've seen the first protest. Maybe we need more. Maybe we need less. Maybe we need to do it a different way. Let us know down below in the comments.